Okay, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Ingolf Ernest. I'm a director and co-founder of psHEALTH, and I'm delighted to have with us today Andrew Osborn, who's the head of service adult care at Wiltshire County Council. Andrew, I'm hoping you are with us.
I am indeed. Good morning, afternoon, everybody.
Fantastic. That's great. Just very quickly to the agenda. So, quick introduction. Andrew will run through about a 20-minute presentation, then Q&A for about 20 minutes, and then wrap up. You will see on the panel on the right that you can ask questions. So please do. We want to try to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And then we'll obviously wrap up. I guess for me this has been very exciting. The topic of outcomes-based commissioning and the experiences in Wiltshire has been very relevant, and I don't think we've held a webinar where there's been this amount of interest. Just quickly, why are we at psHEALTH interested in this topic? As you may know, we have a solution called psMOBILE, which is a platform for digital care management that can help providers with care planning, outcome tracking, and it's a fully configurable solution which looks like this on the mobile. And what we're really trying to do here is to deliver to the care worker or the reablement assistants the full case record into the field. So be that the care plan, the ability to track incidents, but also importantly the ability to track outcomes. So you can see here an example of tracking outcomes relating to keeping safe, managing personal care, etc., etc. But over to the real meat with Andrew Osborn. Andrew's been instrumental in leading the introduction of outcome-based commissioning in Wiltshire, and he's been working on that for several years now. So we're really delighted to have him with us. I think with that, Andrew, can we just hand over to you?
Lovely. Thanks very much, Ingolf, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. It's the first time I've done one of these, so I've got a room with no one in front of me, and hopefully I shall keep this engaging enough for you to stick with me. I think it's all very timely with the CARE Act coming out, so the very focus of the CARE Act is very much around personalisation and outcomes. But I think the message that we've been picking up from a lot of the reading of the CARE Act is almost an underlying implicit message for councils around managing demand for care and long-term costs, particularly around the emphasis is around information and advice and prevention. And for us, that's been a key feature of why we started to look and focus on outcomes in the first place. If I could have the next slide, please, Ingolf. So some of you may be fairly familiar with the sorts of characteristics that that Wiltshire was experiencing, or you may be at the receiving end of some of these from the provider side of it. So we had large numbers of hospital delays, dom care packages that were sort of growing by the week, but without really any real evidence of people's levels of need increasing. From the council's perspective, there were a large number of unnecessary care home admissions simply due to the way we were working and the expectations that people had. And overall, we were spending more than we really had in our budgets to spend. So I think very much we took the outcomes focus from two angles, really. A, in terms of this was a focus on the whole system outcomes and how we could create a health and social care system that was affordable and sustainable in the long term, and that one of the best ways to actually focus on doing that was to focus on individuals' outcomes. So by taking a very personalised individual look at people's outcomes, we could go some way to solving the whole system outcomes and long-term spend costs. If we can move on, please. Just a very quick example, fairly typical sort of care package that we were looking at when we started this. Our operational teams were not necessarily getting out to review packages of support as frequently as they would. We were assessing people at the time of crisis, so the level of support that someone needed at a time of crisis was far greater than they may have needed 6 months later. but of course the package of support had been set up 6 months in advance of that. You come to do a review in 12 months' time, and you've actually, not only have you built dependency into that person's life because they've become reliant on that support, but actually we haven't really made best use of the available resources that we've got available to spread across all the people that we're trying to support. So I think very much this is about having a different conversation. So we took the challenges of that and we set ourselves a number of questions around, having spoken to a large number of customers, what did we want the system to look like and behave? So we wanted to have a system that focused on long-term care costs. We wanted it to be very much person-centered, so we had a lot of time and effort invested in training around from Helen Sanderson, who's an advocate of person-centered thinking. We obviously had to have the services outcome-focused, but importantly, the way we commissioned the service had to incentivize our providers to achieve those outcomes for us, a feature that was completely lacking in a time and task system where providers simply get paid for the amount of time they spend with a customer. We wanted also to have a system that supported people in a crisis, that responded differently to them when they were in need, but also importantly, a large part in Wiltshire of our customers are made up of self-funders. About 70 to 80% of our customers or people in Wiltshire accessing the system fund their own care, and they were being completely left behind. So we wanted to create a marketplace that they would be able to access as well. Importantly, we wanted to do it with health. A large part of our care was delivered via our community health teams. And we wanted this to be far more of a collaboration. So we were looking at how we could transfer different parts of the system over to our providers because we felt they were better placed to take those responsibilities on. So I said we were taking a whole system view of the world. We didn't just commission DomCare. We also went out to recommission our community equipment services. We also we set up a new telecare and response service. So it made telecare services available from the prevention angle, but also as a viable alternative to direct care. But that service was also able to respond to people in a crisis. So it avoided the need for ambulances and it avoided the need for people ending up in hospital. We did give providers a very tight geographical split. So we had monopolistic geographical areas, and we gave providers that because we wanted them to start focusing and building on their community development side. We shared our IT platforms, so our care management systems were shared with providers, and we were very much wanting them to develop a different sort of workforce because we put sheltered accommodation schemes into that specification as well. So very quickly, a sort of a short summary of how Help to Live at Home specification worked, really. We simplified our assessment processes. That enabled us to reduce the amount of time it took to get to customers for assessments down from on average 20 weeks down to 20 days. So that meant we were getting in there much quickly providing support in a more timely fashion. We time limit support very importantly, so every support plan that we commission from our providers has a start and an end date. That enables us to manage a message with customers around their expectations, around how long and the purpose of that support. We very much focus on improvement outcomes, so that although there are large numbers of people who may well have what we would call maintenance outcomes around maintaining a person's well-being and physical health. We're very much though wanting to focus on reablement throughout every single support. We have reablement as a key feature of all our support plans. They're fixed price support plans, and I think what we hoped that would give providers the ability to do was to manage the resources across the length of the support plans to be able to respond to people's changing needs. When you're dealing with individuals, their patterns of support invariably do not stay on a level, on an even keel, that they'll have good days and they'll have bad days. And we wanted the providers to be able to flex the support accordingly. And I think more importantly, we linked our payments to those outcomes. So we have a payments by results mechanism, and I've got a slide later on that talks a little bit more about that. So for the next slide, please. One of the big challenges I think that we've had is how do we actually have a conversation around identifying eligible needs but having support plans that deliver on outcomes. As a local authority, we can only fund eligible needs, but actually if we have support plans that focus on eligible needs, we will continue to only have time and task support plans. So by focusing on simple statements like what is important to and for a person, we're hoping to identify the sorts of outcomes that are actually going to have a meaningful impact on a person's life. Our challenge for providers is how do they shape support that is then going to focus on those important to and for statements while also supporting those customers with those eligible needs. And I would be lying if I said that we've actually successfully managed to address that issue. I think at the moment we're still encouraging our social care staff to deliver better assessments, and we're still working with our provider to deliver better, more focused support plans. I think the other challenges that it gives us is that providers in general are not well placed to deliver those sorts of support plans. They pay their staff by the hour, they have rotas. It simply doesn't fit with how our support plans are looking to be written. So there's a large journey that we've been travelling with our providers around just how do we actually move to those outcome-based support plans. So the proposition I put to you, and that we're sort of it was central to part of the philosophy of why we started this journey, was that actually to deliver an outcomes-focused service, we actually need to work hand in hand with providers. So the commissioners have as much responsibility to work with providers to develop a different sort of workforce. And I just want to go through a couple of areas to help hopefully explain what I mean by that. A fairly simple sort of set of statements here. If you have poor staff, they're unlikely to deliver the sort of support that actually we want, which means they're unlikely to meet the outcomes. And poor outcomes for customers invariably lead to increased costs of care, care costs lasting much longer. So effectively our philosophy was you do get what you pay for. So in terms of commissioning our providers, we have got a very strong commitment to paying above what I suspect most other local authorities are paying for their dom care services. That doesn't come without its issues. One of the features, I think, of the system that we still have is providers' inability to retain and recruit a stable workforce. Typically, recruitment levels and retention rates sort of vary around 30–40% still. But what we know from talking to our hospitals and our health colleagues is that within the same roles they don't have some of the problems that our providers have around holding on to some of their staff. Partly, I think that is explained by partly the NHS badge and the reputation and image that some of those organisations have, but fundamentally I think it comes down to the terms and conditions and how those staff are employed. When you're employing staff to have a hectic schedule of visits and they're not getting paid for the travel time in between, it's unlikely that we're going to be retaining those staff for long periods of time. So our commitment with our providers is very much within our specification. We want our staff to be employed on salaries. We want them to be employed in clustered teams. We want them to be semi-autonomous in managing how they're delivering support with our customers. If I have the next one, please. So clustered teams, a central philosophy of what we were trying to do was how do we actually ensure that we have staff understanding the communities that they're working in, who understand the sorts of community resources that are out there in the community. As local authorities, we're not wanting to have direct support going into people all the time. There are voluntary sector organisations, community groups that are far better placed to provide the type of support that's going to address social isolation and loneliness that are features of the type of people that we're trying to support. I think a key part of this as well is the direction of travel that we're going in with the Better Care Plan. So that's very much focusing around integration with our health colleagues. but it does depend on how you are commissioned by your local authority commissioners as to whether or not you can actually deliver a clustered team model. It's partly one of the reasons why we focused on tight geographical areas. So we gave the providers sheltered accommodation schemes and all the customers living in those areas to allow them to create those clustered teams. It's the area that is probably proving slow progress at the moment, but one of the things that we're exploring with our integrated community health and social care teams at the moment. Looking at payment by results, we didn't introduce payment by results to try and make more money or pay less as a local authority. The reason we introduced payment by results was to create an environment that incentivized providers to focus on the outcomes that they were looking to deliver within those support plans. So we buy fixed price support plans, we don't adjust them for small variations. We do have an exceptions process that works because things do go wrong in people's lives and we can't hold providers accountable for those things. But at the end of the day, if the provider is unable to achieve the outcomes for the person, then the customer doesn't win and the council doesn't win in terms of how they're funding the support. The challenge is always around writing good support plans and how we actually then end up delivering those. The next slide I've got just covers the sorts of outcome domains. I think one of the other challenges we had in terms of delivering this was we did have, when we originally started, about 38 to 40 outcome statements, but staff ended up using those as shopping lists, which didn't actually result in a very outcomes-focused way. The sorts of outcomes we're focusing on are probably the sorts of things that may not even meet eligibility criteria. So if someone has continence issues and is having support to keep them clean and safe and get them dressed and safe in the morning, the sorts of issues, outcomes that we're looking for are how do we address the social isolation issues around getting them back out into the community so they're comfortable doing the shopping themselves, meeting up with their friends, doing the sorts of things that we all take for granted, but actually they've lost confidence in because of the issues that they need support with. So we do work to those outcome domains and we try to write free text outcomes that customers have told us themselves in the assessment. And I don't think in the Care Act guidance that will be coming out, and my understanding is that they'll be moving to a much more outcomes orientated eligibility criteria that will be looking at these outcome domains. So just to finish with really then, a little bit around managing the change and some of the ways that we try to tackle that. I think I mentioned very early on this was very much around collaboration with our partners. We have created a partnership board that meets on a monthly basis. We have all our providers sat around the table, not just the dom care providers but our other commission service providers, and we talk about what's working well and what's not working well. And sometimes we are able to solve problems there and then, but we're all having that conversation together and we're all in agreement around the direction of travel. I think some of the challenges are then getting those messages out to the frontline staff who are then actually delivering those services. A key area was around managing expectations. This is a very different way of working. Historically, customers have got used to their care workers turning up at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock to do whatever it is. This requires a different way of working with customers that requires a more adult conversation around the limitations of the capacity that we've got within the current system and how we can actually then move support around to where it's most needed but still provide the support in a timely fashion where it's needed. The politics was quite important. We had a very strong support from our political leaders at the time. That was vital in when it got difficult. And the other thing I think just to say is not to forget about accommodation. We have, behind all of this, been looking at developing an accommodation strategy which enables us to make sure that we've got the right sort of accommodation for people so that when their own home becomes unsuitable, that there are other alternatives. This does take time though. We took about two years before we went out to commission this service, and we are still working with our providers. We went with a contract that was 5 years plus the option to extend for 2 years, and we think that over those 7 years of the life of that contract, is how long it will take us to get to the point where actually we are probably delivering the sort of workforce that we require and the sorts of outcomes. And the capacity and the demand in the current environment is a very challenging situation. We've got our acute hospitals experiencing large growth in demand, more people coming through their doors, and that's having a knock-on effect into the health and social care system with people requiring support out into the community. Now the last slide I've got there was well, actually, how did this work? Did it actually save us any money in terms of the whole system approach? We think it has. What we won't be able to do is tell you, well, we've saved X million pounds as a result of a particular intervention. But what we are experiencing is that with a different conversation with customers, a different conversation around outcomes, we're not making the same number of residential care placements, which our demographic profile would have said we would have been making. So as a result of that across the whole system, we haven't had to make the considerable savings or investment in adult social care that other local authorities have had to do. That concludes the presentation that I've got, and I'll be really grateful if there are any questions or to open it up to discussion.
Andrew, that's excellent. Thank you very much for thank you very much for that. Lots of really good questions come in here, so I'll throw out a couple. And obviously there are a fair number of providers on this webinar, and I guess there's a question here about there's a fair bit of cynicism in the market. A lot of commissioners talk about commissioning outcomes, but the providers may feel that this is eventually a way of paying less for the same or more service. So if you can address that, and maybe this idea, what's the upside or what's the opportunity for providers here in doing this?
I think some of the challenges we've had within ourselves is we've handed over the support planning as well within our system to providers. So we give the providers the outcomes, and we challenge the providers to actually come up with support plans that are innovative, that are challenging. So they are setting the basis around how they will provide that support themselves. So they have the opportunity with all the customers that we're giving them to make economies of scale. We are expecting providers to try and join up outcomes. So if people have similar outcomes, how can we create capacity within the community, and at the same time help providers to use the limited capacity they have in some instances to make that spread further. So there are opportunities for them to develop and build their services. The opportunities we're giving them are that we have at the start of our process an initial support period. That's a free service to self-funders and to people who will have funded long-term care. So it's a way of providers demonstrating to customers that they're good providers, they deliver quality services, that they can build their reputation within the communities that they're working in. So the self-funders will come back to them if they want further support that the council won't be providing. So we expect providers to be able to become community leaders in many respects and to build and enhance the reputations that they've got in those areas. I think in terms of are we actually looking to do this on the cheap, I think for all the reasons I said earlier, this isn't about cutting costs. We want to have a workforce. So most of our providers, and I don't know if any of them are on the line here, invariably pay above the living wage, and we fund them to a level that allows them to do that. And probably to look at moving to salaried costs, that's that direction of travel. We want to invest in a social care workforce. We want to attract people into the profession of caring. We want to make the caring profession a role that people choose to come into by choice rather than by default.
That's excellent. Andrew, there's a number of really good questions coming in here, so I'll fire off them. One question here is whether you have an integrated health and social care budgets to fund payments by results, because as the questioners say here, the health side clearly.
I wish we did. It would make some conversations around joint health and social care support, but that's very much a conversation that we're having with our CCG colleagues at the moment. I don't think we've got to that stage where we've been able to agree that. So at this point in time, we're focusing on joined up conversations, joint working, integrated working, but still have the joys of separate budgets at the moment.
Okay. Another great question here is, so the question goes, this is a radically new approach or new service, and with hindsight, if you started again today, what would you do differently?
I think whether or not we went with the same size of contracts might be one of the things we might look at, because I think some of the providers that we have in the county have had to grow quite quickly to take on the size of contracts. But there was always a balancing act, I think, in terms of that, in terms of the contracts needed to be big enough to attract providers willing to invest and develop the sort of workforce and model that we were wanting, and you wouldn't have got that if we were working on small scale contracts that didn't have the volume of business within them. But at the same time, having given them the volume of the business, it's given them then challenges in terms of finding capacity to cover all parts of the area that they're covering. So we don't have small pockets of the county that have significantly different services, but we do still struggle with providers being able to create a robust workforce in those areas. So, as I said, a bit of a conversation potentially around the size of those contracts, but also at the same time, what would be a meaningful size of contract to allow a provider to have reasonable confidence around the level of funding that they were going to be getting through that. So a bit of an issue around providers' business models and their ability to invest.
Okay, very good. Here's a question that in essence relates to when or if ever will we see sort of hard numbers on the savings? So there's a suggestion here that a number of commissioners are knocking on your door, Andrew, to learn more about the approach in Wiltshire. This particular person is challenging whether we're going to have to wait for sort of a 7-year cycle to know whether the expectations have been met. I mean, not an easy question to answer, but interesting to hear your views.
And I think we racked our brains for a long time trying to come up with a set of performance measures that we felt was going to be relevant for this contract. The one thing we are able to do is we are able to show customer by customer the sorts of outcomes that they're achieving. So we are able to demonstrate support plan by support plan if those support plans are reducing. So we know what every single the average support plan costs are. We're able to very clearly demonstrate that following the initial support period, the numbers of customers that are leaving the service without a need for longer term support.
Yeah.
So that's a very clear indicator. But I think because there are so many different parts of the system, I think we came to the conclusion that it was almost impossible to attribute savings to any one part of the system. So by putting telecare in, that had a benefit. We were able to reduce the amount of direct support on occasions. It also improved people's confidence. Does it avoid someone needing to go into residential care? Well, it might delay it for 6 to 8 months, which is why we're looking at the long-term costs of care rather than what's happening in the immediate short-term of that customer at that point there and then.
That's great.
I think that's why I think we're looking at those lifetime costs of care and the long-term costs rather than individual areas.
Okay. Just 2 quick follow-up comments. So one here is the feedback from the customers, so in terms of customer satisfaction.
Yep.
And then the other, I guess, is just hearing from you what other commissioners are telling you and how they're approaching this.
I think from the immediate customer feedback, we were always very lucky in Wiltshire in that we were always very high on the customer satisfaction levels. I think it would be fair to say, because the data will be there, that the customer satisfaction levels did drop away in the first year of implementation, but they have quickly recovered, so they're back above and beyond where they were when they started. So we're fairly confident that we are continuing to deliver high quality services. I think what we have done is, because we went from having 20 to 80 different providers in Wiltshire down to having just 4 currently, is that it does, when things don't quite go right, it does focus the attention very clearly on some of those providers. And that's just a message we need to manage, because actually we're probably experiencing less issues with care as a result of what we're doing, but obviously the focus is all on the same provider all of the time. So I think customers generally are happy. A large number did take direct payments at the start because they wanted to stay with carers that were staying with their own organisations. But over time they sort of go through the system. I think a feature of the Dom Care system in general is that there's fairly high turnover of customers through. And we're confident that we continue to offer a model of support that is attractive to customers. The key thing that customers told us was that they did not want to have to navigate the marketplace to find a good care provider to deliver their support. And one of the central things that we were saying to customers was, these are good quality providers who will do good quality support for you. If you want to take a direct payment, that offer will always be there for them. But that was the focus of one of the focuses of why we did this.
You talked there about the reduction of number of providers from a large number down to a handful. How's the sort of the contractual negotiations been, and how's the one question here implies whether some providers have decided not to participate. So what's the reaction of the providers that have worked closely with you?
It's far more constructive and productive contractual relationship these days with 20 to 80 different providers providing support at varying different levels. It was almost impossible to monitor and measure the quality of support that those providers were delivering. We just simply wouldn't have been able to have engaged with providers at the level that we were wanting to. So by working with a much tighter, closer group of providers, with the data that's backing up telling us what's happening at a customer level detail, we know exactly how quickly they're getting through their work, we know how well they're doing their work, and so we're able to have far more meaningful conversations around areas for improvement. So I think everybody all round finds that a far more constructive and productive conversation.
Perfect, perfect. There are a number of questions here about staff and this idea of whether staff really is paid on salaried staff and not paid by the hour, yep. And whether some of this is sort of lost in translation through down to the ground. Any observations on that?
I think we've just got to try and realise that if we really want to change the profile of this sector, we can't carry on in the way that we are at the moment. Urban areas, it may be slightly different in terms of capacity, but particularly for ourselves, with low employment rates, the terms and conditions and the way that staff work simply do not make it a career or a role that people are wanting to take long term. So there's a couple. We are looking at how can we actually do this differently. What is it that attracts people into other roles, and how can we offer those same terms and conditions and opportunities to people working in the domiciliary care sector? How can we explain to people that you might be a care worker today, but we are working with our providers to develop a common competencies program. I know other local authorities are working on this as well to try and improve the baseline competencies of our workers so they can move and almost have a passport around the county that assures that they are able to perform at certain levels and take on different care roles. But we've got to address some of the issues that just don't work for carers around not being able to know how many hours they're going to be working from one week to the next, the fact that they then can't take mortgages out because they can't provide banks the assurances, the sorts of things that make full-time jobs the norm for the rest of us. I know that a lot of our providers still have staff on zero-hour contracts. That does work for some staff, but that's not going to attract people into the profession in the way that we want to try and professionalise and incentivise people to come into the sector.
Perfect. Just a follow-up on the staff here. So the question is, what's been learned about having a wider range of staff for a wider range of services? I guess, is that what's happening, and are there any particular challenges for providers?
I think that's one of the opportunities that we've still got to try and make the most of. So our providers we challenged our providers to say, well, how do you make the most of the opportunity of the sheltered accommodation support? So typically, from our understanding, support patterns for dom care providers, sort of, you've got the peaks at the traditional times at the start, middle and ends of the day. Well, what do you do with the time in the middle? So That's where we're looking for our providers to be looking at. That's where they can be engaging with the communities. That's where they can be supporting people in the sheltered accommodation schemes to make sure that they're okay. So there's a different role. It's not just about personal care all the time. It's also about supporting and working with people in the communities, in those sheltered accommodation schemes, extra care schemes that are starting to take off as well. And pulling people into the support in those settings. It's been slow to take off that area because it's been hard for providers to understand the different roles and how they can make the best use of that.
Yeah. Andrew, it's great. The audience, we've got a number of very good questions here. So one here is about how large the geographic area is and how similar is the demographics. And also whether the voluntary sector helped you shape the model. And then another one is relating to the volumes that were guaranteed. So I guess this is back to clustering, whether that was based on hours or clients or pounds.
We very clearly went into the contract that this was not a guaranteed hours contract. That's partly one of the incentives to the providers was it's in your interests to make sure that this works because your reputation and an ability to deliver on this is partly what's going to build your customer base from the self-funders. We did try to size all the contracts the same. They, generally speaking, were focused around the sort of the larger urban areas, so they tend to have a central hub, but they've all got, as I said, these sheltered accommodation schemes as focal points within those contract areas. The actual number of hours within them, I'm struggling to recall the exact volume, but typically we had spend of around about 1.8 million across the service, and there were 8 contract areas, so if you do the maths, they're all pretty much even across that.
Okay, very good. A bit more detail here on the idea of not paying for outcomes. So how many times do you not pay providers because outcomes have not been achieved? Are providers improving when this happens?
They certainly take note. I think I'm pleased to say that it doesn't happen that often. It's a bit of a conversation most of the time, the exceptions process that we have to do this. If we find our outcomes haven't been met by the time we get to do a reassessment at the end of a support plan, then it's a simple default process because the provider's responsibility is to make sure that they're tracking progress towards those outcomes. So they should be aware of that. But things do go wrong. So some of the times when people don't achieve their outcomes, it's for very good reasons. So I can probably think of about 10 or 12 occasions in the last quarter where we haven't paid for a support plan as a result of providers not meeting an outcome. So given the numbers of people that we're working, that's fairly low. So the risk is fairly low to providers in that area. But it does help make sure that the reason we brought it in was to create an incentive to focus on the outcome, not the actual task in hand.
Yeah, no, I understand. Andrew, if you're all right, can we do a couple of more?
Yeah.
Perfect. So here's one about if you're having, or providers are having capacity issues, are you then buying that in from other providers? What percent goes through other providers? So.
A very small percentage. It is only the old. We've still got separate commissioning arrangements for specialist support around learning disabilities and complex mental health. So they're outside of scope at the moment anyway. But everything else goes through our Help to Live at Home providers. We have obviously a percentage of people that have managed their own care through direct payments. But we have been actively, ever since the contract started, been looking at moving the spot purchased services back to our Help to Live at Home providers. There will always be situations, though, that arise where we need to make alternative arrangements. We haven't lost any providers in the county as a result of what we're doing. As I said, there's a large number of self-funders who sort of keep the rest of the providers going. So we are able to still spot purchase on occasions.
Okay, very good. Here's one which I'm sure providers will sit up and take notice of. So recognizing that like with like comparison is difficult, how much approximately did the hourly rate increase to achieve your current position? So are you able to, I guess what this goes at is
it's a very different business model, so I think hourly rates does largely come back to volume of business.
Yeah.
And the economies of scale that we were looking to give the providers. So again, that comes back to some of the questions around, well, why did we go with the contract sizes that we did? So we, you know, I would be lying to say that there weren't some economies of scale that we were looking for and that we did achieve. But at the same time, our commissioning model was prioritizing quality over cost. So we were looking for quality in everything that we were evaluating, whereas normal local authority procurement approaches would probably have that model the other way around, and more heavily weighted around cost. So we were in the first year paying less per hour, but actually we do only have one flat rate. So we don't have bank holiday rates, half-hour rates, quarter-of-an-hour rates. So again, it's very difficult to make that like-for-like comparison. What we have given our providers is an above inflationary, or at least match the inflationary rises, to make sure that they are continued and able to pay their staff a suitable salary. So we haven't, like many authorities, frozen the fee structures on a year-by-year basis.
Okay. What is it? Yeah, this is sort of the same topic, and it may be hard to answer. But the question is really: so providers are getting into the swing of delivering to this new program.
Yep.
Is it? Do you think now or in a couple of years' time that providers will be able to achieve better or same or better margin than on the traditional model? Because there's no secret that many deliverers have struggled to make ends meet.
I think if they accept the challenge that we need a different workforce to do this, and that they need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to deliver that, then I don't see any reason why providers can't, through a bit of innovation and creativity around how that workforce is deployed and how they access and utilize community capacity, voluntary sector organisations, so they become part of a whole system rather than just a separate part of it. I don't see any reason why providers can't continue to make a reasonable profit margin.
Perfect. So Andrew, we're coming to the very end. I just had maybe two last questions. One is relating to the challenges on the system side. And maybe you could talk a bit about that. You know, how do you capture these outcomes? And the last one is really around the journey you're on, and you know, how far have you gotten on that journey?
The first one is about will vary obviously depending on which area you're working in. But by opening up our social care management system to providers, our assessments are all captured on Care First. We capture the outcome statement, the outcome domains, and the detailed outcomes that customers have told us. Work in progress to make sure that we're getting that smarter and better. And those assessments are then shared directly with our providers. So they see the assessment their end, so they've got direct access to our Care First system. They then submit a support plan on our care management system that we would sign off and approve based on the customer agreeing to it, the provider agreeing that they can deliver it, and us agreeing that we can afford it. So that's all signed off and approved. Those outcomes then form the basis of ongoing monitoring review, which is why we're able to track at a customer level individual outcomes that they're able to see. And the providers see that real time. So we have a performance management system that shows that to them. They can see their contract areas on a daily basis and see how well they are performing, how many times they've not been paid for what they've done, how well they're achieving people coming out of initial support. All that information is kept on the system for them. In terms of the timeline, in terms of where we're at, I think it's easy to forget where we started from and where we've got to now. So it's very easy to try and beat yourselves up on occasion in terms of it is difficult, and I wouldn't pretend that it's not difficult. But I think the conversation that we've had with our staff and our providers, they work much better with each other these days. There was a bit of a them and us type of culture beforehand. I think they are much more seen as part of as a whole team. There are pockets where that works better than others, and where we've managed to co-locate staff, that's worked really well. Where we have joint team meetings, that works really well. Where we don't see that, it tends to work less well. I think we're sort of 50–60% of the way there at the moment, and I'll probably go no more than that, because I don't think we have yet got to that workforce that we require yet to deliver the outcomes. I think we're delivering better support, so we're delivering high quality dom care, but I don't think we're quite fully delivering the model that we went out to commission for yet. But that's because we're in year 3 of 7 years. So I think we're very pleased with the progress we're making, but it remains challenging on a day-to-day basis.
Very well, Andrew. That's fantastic. I think from all of us, thank you so much for taking the time and walking us through the Wiltshire experience. And hopefully we can tap in and do another webinar in a year or two when you've come from 50–60 to up 70–80–90% of the journey.
Absolutely.
In terms of from psHEALTH, so one to the audience, if you have an idea for a webinar, please contact me, Ingolf Ernest. We will do a recording of the webinar on our website, which typically comes out 5–6 days in. And if you're interested, obviously, in seeing a demonstration of psMOBILE and how that can help capture outcomes and deliver digital care management, then please get in touch. All the details are on our website. So I think with that, to everyone, I'm sorry we didn't get across all the questions, a number of very, very good questions, but I'm pleased that this was a topic that resonated with people. And once again, Andrew, thank you very, very much to you.
If there's anything that people wanted to explore in more detail, then you've got my contact details, Ingolf. I'm happy for them to be shared with people, and they can email me direct if they want.
That's fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.